Stoicism forgot a vital part of itself, and without it, it's incomplete. As the soul of Stoicism, that which was present at its birth in ancient Greece, got lost in translation as the teachings moved to Rome. And what was forgotten was a truly beautiful idea, a method that might allow us to embody Stoic principles effortlessly, with right action emerging spontaneously without any need for forceful willpower. What was lost was nothing less than the path to unconscious competence in life itself. And this change didn't start with any of the modern influences like Andrew Tate or something like that. It happened all the way back with the Romans, from whom we get almost all that we know modern Stoicism from. For Simone Weil, what was forgotten was the, quote, love of the beauty of the world, unquote, which the original Greek Stoics and their contemporaries so wonderfully understood. Today, we're going to look at what happened, how the Romans caricatured the original Greek Stoicism, turning it into a very useful and yet somewhat hollow husk of what it once was. And finally, we're going to talk about what we can learn from the original Stoicism and how we might be able to restore the attitudes that they had back then, and how radically transformative a way of living they offer. First, let's establish what we're actually talking about here. What is this so-called original Greek Stoicism? Because the answer seems lost to history. There is actually only one surviving work from the Greek Stoics, that is Cleanthes' hymn to Zeus. Everything else was destroyed in the culling of pagan literature that happened as antiquity ended. All the rest of what we know about Greek Stoicism is taken from second-hand accounts written by Romans. What we can do is look at the context that surrounded Greek Stoicism, doing our best to infer from these influences. And so we'll be looking to the work of Plato, to Socrates, to Homer, to the Ionians, and perhaps even the Pythagoreans. Within this broader context, we can uncover a mystical tradition that permeated all of ancient Greece, a deep and stunning conception of the cosmic beauty of existence and our place within it. For this attitude was likely implicit in ancient Greek Stoicism, and this really is what I mean when I speak of Stoicism's lost soul, but in truth I haven't found any documents from Zeno or anything like that. So what we're working with is his set of influences. So let's walk backwards through the history of Stoicism, from 2025 to the Romans, and then all the way back to the Greeks. Stoicism is having a really weird moment right now. It seems to have become a way for dudes to talk about emotional suppression and being productive and selling courses. And if that helps you, that's really all well and good. But calling that Stoicism is sort of like calling the President of the United States a dude, or St. Paul's Cathedral a building. It's like technically true, but it just misses so many important details. Even if we go back to the sources, to Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus, we still won't quite find that reverent core that Simone Weil urges us towards. To do that, we have to go back to archaic and ancient Greece. Outside of Aristotle, practically all of the prominent thinkers we know of in ancient Greece spoke more like mystics than strict logicians. They emphasized oneness with the world and with nature. They believed the world to be organized by a divine logos, and were obsessed with finding symmetry and beauty within it. Informed by the Ionian precursors, so much of how the Greeks viewed the world was through a lens of beauty first, with symmetries in nature informing symmetries in the metaphysical planes. Pythagoras and his mathematical theories seemed tied to the strange ideas he had about unity, for example. And the same is true for other early scientist philosophers like Empedocles. And we might find a great summation of the ethos of ancient Greece within Plato. I think he makes a good source because he's known to have contributed a lot of conventions to ancient Greek thought. Him and Socrates are believed to have inspired Stoicism, for example. And additionally, Plato is unique in that he continually reiterates that he is one who has invented nothing, always highlighting that he is simply giving voice to a tradition, assembling the thoughts of people like Socrates, and maybe even of secret cultures that we now know nothing about, like the Orphic tradition. Because of this, we might consider him a sort of courier of cultures through which we get a glimpse into the spiritual life and thinking of ancient Greece. To quote Weil, "From him we ascertain the ideas that we are children of heaven, that earthly life is a forgetting of the supernatural and transcendent truth, and that the condition for salvation is thirst for the forgotten truth." An example of this can be found in a dialogue Plato recorded between Socrates and Theodorus. Theodorus says to Socrates that if he could persuade more people, as Socrates has persuaded him, there would be more peace and less evil on this earth. To which Socrates replies, "But it is not possible that evil should disappear, Theodorus. For something is always needed which is more or less the contrary of good. And this something cannot have its seat among the gods, but it must circulate in the realm of mortal nature in this present world. That is why one should strive to flee this world as swiftly as one can. This flight is, as far as possible, an assimilation in God." Socrates goes on to criticize those who would seek good only for gains on this mortal plane, those who would seek goodness for the sake of appearing good, for example. Instead, he advises that people should be good, because goodness is a quality of the heavens, and the duty of any righteous person is to make themselves out in the image of the gods. Thus, one should be good. From this, we can take the following conclusions. 1. Goodness is not of this world. Goodness is of the heavens. Man's task is to imitate it. Something like a will to God is required. And implied within this, humanity cannot produce true goodness alone. Secondly, he talks about attaining this goodness as a flight from this world. Thirdly, in this world here below, good and evil endlessly produce one another. Socrates locates good to be not of this world. For Simone Weil, this is a progenitor of certain religious ideas, which state that true good things only produce good, true evil things only produce evil. But on this earth, we are living amidst a world in which good and evil are mixed together. The fact of evil, then, must be accepted for Socrates as simply a part of the lot of men who are mortal. And we can see the lineage of these ideas in early Stoicism. As Chrysippus, one of the earliest Stoics, said, "The universe itself is God and the universal outpouring of its soul. It is the same guiding principle operating in mind and reason, together with the common nature of things, that makes up the totality that embraces all existence. This is the very thing which makes up the virtue of the happy person in a well-flowing life. When the affairs of life are in every way turned to the harmony between the individual divine spirit and the will of the director of the universe." Or in the hymn to Zeus, "Truly this whole universe obeys you wherever you lead and willingly submits to your rule. Such is the servant you hold in your unconquerable hands, a double-edged, fiery, ever-living thunderbolt, for by it strikes all the works of nature happen. By it you direct the universal reason which pervades all things. And to bring order to the disorderly, even the unloved is loved by you. For you have joined all things into one, the good and the bad, that they all share in a single, unified, everlasting reason." What is vital to understand here is that the Greek Stoics understood goodness as a flight from the concerns of this world and towards the image of God. And informed by this, they came to accept the good and the bad stoically, as all a part of a single unified reason. They operated with slavish attention towards this harmony. Their focus was not on the will of man, but on the will of God. Their works read like devotional prayers. The heralded reason and willpower were understood as tools that brought humanity into unison with what is. They were bridges to the divine. They were not the ends in and of themselves. The reverent beauty of Greek Stoicism lies here. They were livid in humility. They refused to locate goodness outside of the gods, and strived, making it their mission, to live in harmony with nature and with what is, in harmony with this image of God and of goodness. In this way, the Greek Stoics renounced their own personality to make themselves instruments for something greater to move through. And it's from here that the standard tropes of Stoicism proceeded from an understanding that good is not of this world, and yet we are on this world, and that upon this earth, good and evil are inevitably mixed, and thus our duty becomes to accept them stoically, without any distraction from the brutality and hardships of the earth. This is true amor fati, love of fate. To quote Simone Weil, "It is because it can be loved by us, it is because it is beautiful that the universe is a country. It is our only country here below. This thought is the essence of the wisdom of the Stoics. We have a heavenly country, but in a sense it is too easy to love because we can imagine it as we please. We run the risk of loving a fiction under its name. If love of the fiction is strong enough, it makes all virtue easy, but at the same time of little value. Let us love the country here below. It is real. It offers resistance to love. It is this country which God has given us to love. He has willed that it should be difficult, yet possible to love it. Nowadays, we say the same words but without the same meaning, and we saw this habit forming even with the Romans. The Romans took these ideas and adapted them, understanding Stoicism from a distinctly Roman perspective. Rome was the greatest city, a militaristic superpower, and its mythology reflected this. All was for the glory of Rome. Goodness, the highest moral value, was glory for the empire. Importantly, I think this attitude is evident from Rome's context, even if the exact words don't spell it out. Through this, the Romans came to locate goodness as something of this world. And it's this belief that separated the Romans from the Greeks so completely. Because of this, they came to focus on how these teachings could be valuable to an individual dealing with life. How one can be stoic in the face of turmoil. How one can deal practically with matters of the law, of money, and of how to be a good citizen. We can say that through the Romans, Stoicism became more focused on unison with society rather than unison with the universe. Amor fati became love of one's fate within society, not love of fate within the cosmos. The consequence of this, that Stoicism became what Simone Weil called a, quote, Roman caricature, appealing to the muscular will, unquote. For will is something of this world, it's something man possesses. And if it's believed that goodness too is of this world and can be attained through will alone, then it's only natural that willpower becomes the focus. And the echo of this perspective is felt strongly in modern Stoicism, which places paramount importance on willpower and the individual. And Weil argues that by neglecting to understand the cosmic perspective the Greeks held, the Roman and modern Stoics are fundamentally unable to perceive the world in the wholeness of its truth in the same way the Greeks did. The Greeks possessed a universal consciousness, the Romans a Roman consciousness. To show the consequences of locating goodness to be of this world, let us examine the founding myths and wars of Greece and Rome. Ancient Greek history begins with a tragedy, the destruction of the city of Troy. And unlike other civilizations, they did not revel in the glory of this. Rather, they were haunted by the memory of it. The most poignant example of this is in Homer's Illiad, a foundational text of Western literature, in which the truth of human misery is displayed wholeheartedly. In the Illiad, both the Greeks and the Trojans suffer immensely. Both are thwarted by forces beyond their control, by the gods. Victory or loss, whether one ends up as a slave or as someone in power, all of these things are decided by, quote, pitiable fate, unquote. In this way, both sides of this war, the Greeks and the Trojans, are presented as victims. Neither is free from the torments of bloodshed and of war. Even the victorious are forced to face the suffering and terror of their victory and its violence. The victims of Troy are mourned with poetic severity. The downfall of these supposed Greek enemies are written of as the deaths of the guardians of chaste wives and of little children. Through this, Homer demonstrates his capacity to show the downfall of Troy not in the light of a victory for Greek heroes, but as a way of getting at a moral code. And other Greek writers, like Aeschylus and Sophocles, also show this same capacity. And this urgently sympathetic view towards one's enemies demonstrates an incredible ability to handle truth. For to recognize the suffering of another person as suffering, irrespective of what flag they fly, is truth. For they, it is the progenitor of the idea of love thy neighbor. The Greeks did not deceive themselves of the often arbitrary and horrendous nature of violence and suffering. They understood that pain was more so a reflection of one's place among these forces of fate, with all of humanity, including themselves, subject to the same merciless gravity. Of their place within the world, they were immensely humble. Contrast this now to Rome, and its treatment within the sacking of Carthage and the annexation of Greece. The Romans destroyed Carthage, methodically razed it to the ground, sold its population into slavery. This wasn't seen as a tragedy, but rather as a great Roman victory, with Cato the Elder calling out repeatedly for Carthage's destruction. There's an account within the history of the Carthaginian people pleading with the Romans for peace and mercy, and it plays out like a Shakespearean tragedy. This is an illustrative example of the attitude of the Romans. These patterns of brutality were repeated throughout Rome's conquests. The Romans were committed to propaganda and justified these actions through an ideology of civilizational supremacy, and even within their literature, from Virgil's Aeneid to Livy's Histories, Rome's dominance was portrayed as divinely ordained and morally necessary. But what do these habits of Rome have to do with modern Stoicism? Well, all that we know of Stoicism comes from these Romans, and I believe that they had to subtly shift the emphasis of the teachings to make it more palatable, more understandable within this Roman context, less focused on the universe and all of our roles within it, and more focused on Roman life and life within the city. The Roman Stoics lost some interest in the cosmos for the sake of worldly matters. It thus became more focused on the individual and methods for him to improve his lot. This seems to have been almost entirely inherited by modern Stoicism, which seems predominantly focused on productivity and the individual. But that soul of Stoicism is not lost, only buried. The Roman Stoic works are fantastic, truly gorgeous pieces. It is knowledge of the original, more mystical Greek tradition that heightens the experience of reading them now and provides a vital context I think we must bring back into the folds of Stoicism. Consider this classic quote from Marcus Aurelius. "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil, but I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood and birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine." Aurelius urges us to, quote, "regard the universe as one living being, having one substance and one soul," unquote. We can see reflections of this in the way he approached his own death, and similar sentiments are littered throughout Seneca and Epictetus. But these aspects of the work aren't what's focused on nowadays, as present people often struggle to separate the symbolic value of metaphysical ideas from their literal interpretations. Religious ideas have, on a whole, become far too propositional, with people placing ideas against each other in a war of literal meaning. I think we should learn from the ancients, in which religion was viewed as a practice of life in which all people are participating at all times. And furthermore, I'd contend that the Roman Stoics, growing up in the context that they did, had a warfaring relationship, even to their own psychology, and they underrated the capacity for love and desire to produce right action, or perhaps even perfect action. The passion for this topic for me comes from the idea that these metaphysical ideas should not have been lost. Stoicism holds within its hands an incredibly precious jewel, the keys to the kingdom of the love of the beauty of this world. When Stoic virtue is considered seriously, in conjunction with a mind orientated towards transcendent goodness, it presents such a complete and compelling philosophy that anybody who sees the linkages of it is compelled to shout from the rooftops of its value. To speak to this topic of transcendent goodness, I'll draw again on Simone Weil here. She believes that we must consider goodness to not be of this world, and thus, true goodness is something that is received, it is not sought after. To seek for goodness is to use a human tool to which you will find a human answer. Recall our earlier analysis from Socrates when he said that things of this earth, the good of this earth, will endlessly produce the evil of this earth as well. It'll have to be some kind of socially determined goodness. So for Weil, absolute goodness is not here below. Absolute goodness is something you come to via thirst. It's something that looks a little bit like the love of thy neighbor, which for her represents a supernatural quality. The Greeks represented this idea through their depictions of the gods and the oracles, to whom heroes attended to for answers. They believed that the Greek Stoics attended to transcendent goodness. Their vocation was thus to love life completely through all conditions, like a good servant. Through this, they might have come to a relationship to right action that was based on a seamless unison with what is good, beautiful, and true. Only when right and moral action is so embodied that it flows out effortlessly as thunder follows lightning, can there be limitless goodness, can there be saintliness. And the precursor to this mode of being is genuine desire. In Gravity and Grace, she writes that the saint is like a coward. He goes towards goodness like a bee to a flower. He has no other choice. Choice, she believes, is a concept beginning to a lower level. Thus, for saints and sages, choice does not even enter into the equation, and hence neither does willpower. And she believes the ancient Stoics had this attitude, which she takes from her reading of Plato, who stressed that one should not seek to alter their actions in the external world, but rather to change the inner architecture of their soul such that one is in harmony with the good. He says something like action is the pointer which shows the balance, and we must not change the pointer but adjust the weights. However, it is all too easy to touch the pointer in these golden scales of Zeus. It is not that willpower has no place, but rather that willpower is a part of this natural mortal part of the soul, and is thus subordinate to the transcendent goodness. They write that the weeds are pulled up by the muscular effort of the peasant, but only the sun and rain can make the crops grow. For her, the emphasis on practicality and on muscular will is troublesome, because willpower is always a limited resource. And so even if one knew what was truly good, if one had to constantly twist themselves to go towards it, it would not be suitable. The right path is to love goodness so rapturously that you are like a little child, helplessly excited by it. To speak bluntly, the transformation Vey talks about is akin to something like enlightenment or nirvana or waking up. She believes the Stoic sage is of the same caliber, and Stoicism's role in this equation is to receive the truths of the world in all of its brutality, and to look at it still lovingly, like Homer recounting morosely the pangs of pain felt by the death of Greeks and Trojans, and nonetheless finding some poetic beauty within all of it. Stoicism is strength training for the soul, and I believe that the seeds of all of these ideas are within those Stoic texts, hidden amidst their metaphysics. But it's so hard to talk about any of these ideas or the metaphysics of the Stoics nowadays, because they are hardly taken seriously at all. The ideas they had about the logos, the pneuma, and all the rest are buried amidst the solely practical concerns and advice of Stoicism. That is why this video is so provocatively titled, How Stoicism Lost Its Soul. I hope it will inspire some Stoic fans to connect to the spiritual depth that's within Stoicism, and move beyond its merely material benefits. If Stoicism were to become nothing more than productivity advice, that would be a tremendous loss. And today, given the state of the world, Stoic sages or people who take those ideas with utmost seriousness, I think, is more necessary than ever. And Stoicism offers a combination of reverence and practicality to deal with the conditions of our rapidly changing world. And so, with all of this said, what is the path towards this love of the beauty of the world? It all revolves around realizing this beauty, not abstractly, but concretely in your day-to-day life. And the method for doing this, Simone Weil provides one, but it lies at the intersection of her rather idiosyncratic readings of Stoicism and of Christianity. She begins by stating that there is only one way of receiving nothing but good, and that starts with recognizing that people who are not animated by what she calls pure charity are merely wheels in the order of the mechanisms of the world. This is to say that those who are not animated by pure virtue, by the good, should be expected to be greedy or dishonest or rushed or anything like this. And all of this is to be expected. They are, in a sense, doing what they must. This is what Marcus Aurelius speaks about when he reminds himself that the people that he's going to meet today, though they may be dishonest or arrogant or ingratiate, that they too share the same nature as he, and they too possess a share of the divine. And for Aurelius, it is the fact that they do not know the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil that they act in this way. Once you come to know this about people, you can come to accept people as they are, and know that whatever behavior they bring towards you is really more so a reflection of their conditions rather than yours. In this way, there is some part of you that becomes untouchable, some part of you that you know has more absoluteness to it than these more relative human concerns that people might bring you. This is the first step in cultivating a sort of love and understanding, as in knowing this about people, you can come to love them in the same way that you can come to love the rain that comes with the clouds sometimes, merely a manifestation of the order of the world. There's a paradox here, because on the one hand, by recognizing that people are in a sense slaves to their desire, and that's why they act in these ways, it might seem as though you're taking freedom from them. However, on the other end of things, it's this insight that allows you to love the freedom that they have. When you can see them slightly inoffensively as a manifestation of the universe, you can think here of free will and its role in the Bible, and how the giving of free will unto people did not at all diminish God's love for his people. Rather, it was evidence of it. She believes that once you know this, you can come to see that all things are good, in the sense that even if something seems to be bad, if somebody seems to be rude to you or rushed, if you can learn to love it, then it will be a source of good. Or if some pain comes to you, if some suffering comes to you, if you can learn to love that too, not just abstractly, then that too comes from the good. She says something like the bread and the sword are each a virgin of meaning. But by having a love of the order of the world, a love of the beauty of the world, both of them come to you as signs of the good, or in Wei's words, both of them come to you from God. In Stoic terms, we can find resonances in this in the ways in which Stoics occasionally speak of life like a battlefield. Through this, we can see how all that life throws at us is like a grindstone upon which we sharpen the sword of our soul. And the jump from this insight to beauty is for Wei absolutely necessary. It is perhaps what she felt was lacking in the Roman perspective that was so abundant in the Greek Stoic perspective. For Simone Weil, beauty is the only source of finality here below, the only source of something absolute. She defines a beautiful thing as that which is an end in and of itself. Beauty is self-justifying. It has no purpose other than to be beautiful. In the moment of its manifestation, it is complete and perfect. And we can contrast that to these things of the world which are apt to change, or which require some future event in order to reach satisfaction. And yet, hidden within this cycle of repetitiveness, this constant impermanence, there is beauty, there is something absolute. Simone Weil gives working as a great example of this, because work shows us so bluntly the absurdity of life here below, working to live and living in order to work. She thinks that if you look at either of these in isolation, it is terrible, it is a doom, because each end of this equation taken on its own is entirely unsatisfactory. It's reliant on this element of time. It is not complete in and of itself. We must see these as a cycle. For Weil, dissolving the idea of time is one of the first things you have to do in order to have a love of the beauty of the world. She advocates rising from time into something she calls eternity. Eckhart Tolle might call this the power of now, the eternal now, something like that. With careful scrutiny of the cyclic nature of things like work or anything else on this earth, she believes we can come to see how attachment to anything on this earth will lead to dissatisfaction. And through this, she thinks we detach from the things of this earth and begin to thirst for the absolute good. And for her, thirst is one of the conditions of salvation. We might draw from the book of Matthew here. How blissful those who hunger and thirst for what is right, for they shall feast. And it's in this thirst for the absolute good, this turning away from the world, which paradoxically points us right back to earth. It is as Christ modeled for us. Christ, who is truth himself, emptied himself of his divinity and came back to earth to die, along the way showing us how to live. As among the seemingly mundane daily activities that occupy us, we are given the opportunity to do good and to love thy neighbor. This touches on what Vey sees as one of the most mysterious aspects of the Christian faith. As for her, she thinks that God gave us personhood and God gave us personality and an ego such that we might renounce it so that we can become like God again. And thus, the kindest thing we can do for anybody else is to give them their personhood, to treat them like a respectable, wholehearted, complete individual, imitating the universal love of thy neighbour that the Good Samaritan showed to the inert matter on the floor, as in doing so you too give them the opportunity to renounce their self. We are called to do good for good's sake and nothing more, and the point of view we're provided with is extreme, as Christ himself, the perfect person, was put through immense suffering nonetheless. Christ walked towards his death and cried out to the arrant heavens, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" To which the heavens answer was silence. Even Christ had a crisis of faith and was given no recompense from the heavens above. There were no consolations in faith even. Christ had to suffer absolutely, totally, and acutely. And we are told that this is our God. This is who we should love absolutely, one who is bleeding and dying on the cross, powerless. Christianity gives us a supernatural use for suffering. We are told to look at the brutality of life and stare at it unflinchingly, go towards it with naked receptivity and say yes to it all, and through it all, love it all. So it is exactly that which causes existential crises that is the way out through the existential crisis. Our fate here on earth is to be beneath the quiet skies. The heavens will give us nothing, and we must love through it all, through it all. God will give us nothing, and in so doing gives us everything. It is not that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, we must be Sisyphus and we must be happy. To quote Vey, we must prefer a real hell to an imaginary paradise. In complete acceptance of what is, including all of the brutality, tumultuousness, and terror that we might face, we can come to have a love of the order of the world, a love of the beauty of the world. Because through this, things become a finality in and of themselves. They are as they are, and we experience them without distraction, absolutely pointless and exquisitely meaningful. Amor fati. Oh, that was a lot. I had a lot of fun making that video, but I understand that so much of this can sound so insane. I think it's really good work, but I do not think a video is the best way to understand any of this. I think these ideas really benefit from sitting with them and reading them. And on that note, I'm planning on starting a Substack soon, the link's in the description. Writing is often a better way to sit with ideas, and there's a lot of things I'd love to share there for you guys that are perhaps not best suited to videos. For example, there was actually an entire another section of this video dedicated to Simone Weil's analysis of how the church and Christianity in general moved away from this love of the beauty of the world, moved away from ideas of Greek Stoicism that they were very close to in their earliest days in the 1st and 2nd century, more towards focusing on doctrinal precision and all of this. And perhaps I could share that whole section in a newsletter rather than making another 20-minute video about it. But much more importantly than any of that, I wanted to provide some recommendations, since people often ask about it in the comments, for what to follow up on if you are interested in this topic. I'll say first that I think that if this topic is really inspiring to you, then the ways in which you should read these works is using the method of attention that Simone Weil herself laid out. I talked about it in the first chapter of my initial Simone Weil video, which I'll put up here somewhere. And if this is interesting to you, I would attend to the works of Homer, Aurelius, Epictetus, the New Testament, and the Stoic Reader, which I thought was the best summary I could find of these ancient Greek Stoics, since so much of it really is lost to history. Additionally, if you're interested in Simone Weil, I really recommend starting with Waiting for God, because it's much more legible than a lot of her other works. But if you go through that and you enjoy it, I can recommend Gravity and Grace, as well as Imitations of Christianity Among the Ancient Greeks, which this video drew a lot of inspiration from. Both of those are collections of her notes. Illiad, or the poem of Force, is also a great read on this topic. But most importantly is to simply live and embody these principles. Part of why I recommended going through these works with Simone Weil's method of attention is because in the methodology she spells out, it really is not so much about merely an intellectual grasping. It's a process more of imbibing the lessons into your bones. And really that's what this is all about, as intellectual ideas only are ashes. So, to finish with what Marcus Aurelius said, spend no more time arguing about what a good man should be, and be one.